Welcome to Cut the Crop, keeping you in the know about everything you grow. Researchers, growers and other interesting folk delivering insights and information on topics ranging from agronomy to profitability. Brought to you by the Foundation for Arable Research.
Hello and welcome to Cut the Crop. I'm Anna Heslop and today my guest is Dr Aoife O'Driscoll from NIAB in the UK. So Aoife has been with us for a couple of weeks as part of our A Lighter Touch national tour, the big roadshow. So we're going to catch up with her about what she's doing in the UK and what she's seen here. So maybe first, Aoife, welcome.
Thank you. It's great. I had a great time here.
Tell us a wee bit about your role at NIAB and how that sort of corresponds with sort of things that are going on here.
Yeah, so NIAB has a kind of 100-long-year history in the UK. And we've really focused in the past on variety trialling and seed certification on vegetable crops, cereal crops, oilseed rape crops. But over the last kind of 10, 20, 30 years, we've really navigated into a variety of different areas. So genetics and breeding, agronomy, data science. We also have a big horticulture side of our business, looking at the wine industry and the fruit and soft fruit and top fruit. And it's really kind of morphed into encompassing all areas of agriculture, which is really positive to see. My area is I'm a plant pathologist by training. So I started off as a molecular plant pathologist working on septoria in wheat, but I've done lots of different things over the years in soft fruit. I spent a lot of time in vegetable fields looking at diseases, and now that I'm back at NIAB, I focus on arable crops and the field management of pests and diseases in arable crops.
So you've been here for a couple of weeks now.
I've loved it. I've absolutely loved the whole time I've been here for 2 weeks. It's been great. Yeah, I'm really grateful that you had me over.
How do you see the similarities with what your UK arable growers are facing compared to what you've seen here?
Yeah, so the kind of the differences and the similarities are around three things really. So the climate, the economics, and also the farming systems as well. So climatically, there's definitely a lot of similarities. I've been down to the Southlands, up to the Drylands and up into the North Island as well. And that really encompasses the range of climatic differences and similarities that we see across the UK. The economics really is the big difference there. And I think what I've seen in New Zealand is firstly two things. So obviously the lack of subsidies that you have here compared to the incentives and especially around the environmental schemes that we now have in the UK, which is driving a lot of change. But also the farming system. So how I was really surprised at how many people have embraced direct drilling here and kind of changes in move to no-till and direct drill systems. But also the most mind-blowing thing I've seen is the rotations. I couldn't believe when I found out there was farms with 20 crop rotations in them, and how you manage all of those different things when most of our cropping systems in the UK are driven around wheat. And everything around that is, I wouldn't say a minor crop, but it's definitely not the main crop.
A supporting crop.
It's a supporting crop, yeah. And the seed production as well is just not something that we have in the UK, the scale of the seed production that you have. So it's blown my mind that the level of knowledge and skills and the rotations that you have to manage here. And I suppose that's largely driven from what I've seen is around the economics of it and the markets that you have here. Whereas we really have a strong market for cereal crops and cereal grain, flours and all those things.
Does that concentration on cereal crops in the UK, does that impact on the disease management that you have to deal with? Yeah,
definitely. And diseases and pests. And again, coming back to the climate as well, you know, what we're battling with in terms of pests and diseases now is mainly due to climate, but also some other factors. So from the point of view of weather, what we're getting now is very mild winters with a lot of rain. So when we have issues with things like brown rust or septoria, or we'll say aphids or soil-borne pests, we're not getting the cold winters that we've had previously. So they're not dying off over the winter. And then that inoculum or those larvae or those pests are overwintering into the spring. And that's creating a huge disease burden as we go in, which is proving much more difficult to get rid of. And then when we get the rain, it used to fall in kind of days or little bits here and there. But now it comes in a deluge of like a month, and you just can't get on to do your jobs that you need to do. And things just kind of fall out of control for us. And it's really hard to get on with jobs. So they would be the two factors now that we're dealing with, really.
So all of that rain happening, how are they trying to navigate around guessing when that's going to be?
Well, you can't guess. And I think what we've learned from the last 2 or 3 years is, we always try to advise with our cereal crops is to try and to do it as late as possible. So mid-October is a good time for us to sow. And if you can get it out until late October, you're doing even better for lots of reasons.
So that's autumn.
That's autumn, yeah. So we try to, exactly. So mid-autumn is a good time for us. If you can get it into late autumn, very, very beginning of winter, that's even better for drilling. Now, the problem is if you get rain going into the winter time, your crop is just, it won't establish. So people are kind of going very early autumn, about maybe a month after they've harvested their cereal crops. And of course, that's driving things like blackgrass. So they're not getting the chit for the blackgrass. When you get into the spring and you've got these really lovely lush crops, that's driving disease and causing lots of other problems and knock-on effects. So we're really having to think about what you do in the autumn and how that impacts you as you go into the spring and the summer. And what's that going to cost you in terms of your disease management strategies.
It's such a juggling act, and I'm sure whatever you do, you miscalculate and
always, yeah,
go early.
Yeah, and we're not very good at not doing anything. We want to be out there getting on top of things, and I can totally understand the nervousness that we have around kind of getting crops established, because if you don't have anything, then you can't manage it. So yeah, it's a real challenge for us, the balancing act.
So one of the things that you mentioned to me that you'd noted while you were here was around seed treatments, and that's not something that UK farmers are using.
No. So insecticides, I wouldn't say they're a dirty word, but they really are kind of going under the radar a lot now. So in terms of seed treatments, we only really have them for a set number of crops. So for example, for sugar beet, when we get a derogation for them on an annual basis, and it has to be due to if the aphid pressure is high for virus transmission. But for other crops, we just don't use them at all. But I've learned that why you use seed treatments is for grass grub, and we don't have a grass grub problem, so that understands why you use them. But we also, for things like BYDV, we are coming to a situation now where we have kind of virus tolerant varieties coming through the market, and there are other ways that we manage our kind of airborne pests for cereals.
So is that pest and disease tolerance quite a major focus?
Huge focus, and more as we go forwards, especially with this kind of overwintering pests and disease inoculum, and people are trying to find other ways of managing pests and diseases without having to spend a fortune on chemistry. And this year was a real test for us in terms of both brown rust and BYDV and other pests and diseases, and it really showed the value of varietal resistance and tolerance to these pests and diseases.
And how do your growers, you have a recommended list?
Yep.
And that's how they would work through and decide what's going to work for them?
Yeah, definitely. So, previously, yield is king. Yield is always king, but other factors are coming into play now. And with the cost of inputs going up, yield will always really matter, but margin is more important to us now. So if you can get, we all want to go for the 15 tonnes a hectare crop, but if you have to spend a fortune on getting there and your variable costs are the variable costs are getting more variable and higher every year, it's not worth getting 15 tonnes a hectare if you're having to spend a fortune on growing it in the first place. So people are really looking at kind of managing those costs now and getting a decent crop, and without having to spend a fortune on it, really. So that's where the disease resistance and tolerance comes in there. So
what's a decent crop? What sort of yield? And that possibly varies across the country as well.
Yeah, so we'll say a first wheat on heavy land would be anywhere between probably 7 tonnes a hectare and 12 tonnes a hectare. That's a first wheat.
Yeah.
And kind of typical kind of margin for that would be probably about £700 so a hectare. So yeah, it's again very variable year on year. Our fungicide costs are going up and up. So an average fungicide program in 2023 would have been around £120 a hectare, so about $240, and that's gone up to around £150, £160 a hectare now, so $320. But in that, there's a huge range. And it's a difficult cost to manage year on year.
So that's another issue around cultivar selection.
Yeah, hugely, because, choosing the right cultivar can basically mean that you eliminate a spray, which could save you probably $60, £30, or reduce your sprays. So anything you can do to trim little bits off your margin or your variable costs make a big difference.
So you're really speaking the language of a lighter touch, aren't you?
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Which you probably didn't know much about till you got here, but you have had a big crash course.
I've had a big crash course, and I think what I noticed when I came here was that when Joe Drummond, senior serial researcher at FAR, she's amazing, and we've worked quite a lot over the last 2 weeks. But my time spent here over the last 2 weeks really showed me that some of the stuff that they're doing in a lighter touch, we started kind of 4 or 5 years ago. So looking at things like blends and biologicals and how to integrate them into arable programs. And at the time, there was a lot of skepticism about it. And I had to be quite brave with doing certain things because, it was seeing a bit niche and what's she talking about. But actually, a lot of it is the norm for us now. So, growing cultivar mixtures, variety blends, integrating kind of plant health products into early stages of the program. This is all very normal for us now. And I think you guys will get there as well in a couple of years. It just takes time. And is the time like a psychological, like a mind shift time, or like getting your head around that's weird, or what is the time? What affects people's decision making? Well, first of all, we only get one shot of this every year, which is the first challenge. And second of all, I think there's 2 factors here really. It's not being afraid to be a little bit off the wall if you're trying these things out, and not being afraid to be judged, whatever else, not being afraid to make mistakes, and you will make mistakes and that's okay, and not hiding them. And also just farmer to farmer learning. So this is where your growers leading change comes into practice. In the UK, we have the HDB have their Monitor Farm program. We also have a huge NIAB membership of about over 2,000 members, where we have about 13 different farmer groups, and they're all trying different things and sharing. So the growers leading change, or these farmer groups, are where things really happen, and where you can kind of try things out. And what I kind of tried to get across at the events we did the last 2 weeks was just give it a go, try it in a field, do it at a field scale, give it a go and see how you get on. It doesn't have to be across the whole farm. And if you make a mistake, it's fine. That's how you learn. It's like when you try out a new wheat variety or a new variety in the field, it takes time to learn how to grow it. It's no different with any of these practices. Yeah.
Okay, can you just outline how the cultivar blends impact on disease management?
So there's a number of ways. So when we first started looking at the trials in 2020, we were looking at it purely from a disease management perspective. So we were looking at growing different cultivar mixtures from different groups, so feed wheats, biscuit wheats, and milling wheats, and trying to find ways to reduce our fungicide programs. So from a disease management perspective, what's happening there is if you've got, say, septoria coming into the crop, and in a bad year, you can get maybe 6-7 disease cycles in a season. Now, the more cycles you have, the more chances there are for the septoria to mutate and develop resistance or virulence. And all the blend is doing basically is it's having a dilution or a barrier effect. So the septoria comes in, it tries to navigate its way through the blend. It has resistant varieties in there. It has less resistant varieties in there. And they just mix and match. And the septoria finds it quite hard to make its way through the crop. So you're still getting the same amount of inoculum, but it's going into different varieties. So you're reducing your risk that way and slowing down the disease as it goes through. From a kind of a yield and a margin perspective, what we find is that where you have susceptible varieties, where there's probably quite a variation in yield sometimes, the blend basically knocks off the lower half of that variability in the yield. So you might have resistant varieties that are quite high and susceptible varieties that are quite variable with maybe a lower end, and the blend knocks off that lower end. So it gives you yield stability over time. So the blend probably won't give you a massive increase in yield, but it will allow you to have an increase in margin because you are spending less on that crop. There'll be less disease overall in the paddock or the field. And so, yeah, you're making economic gains that way.
Yeah, it's interesting because it seems like the opposite of what you would work. But
yeah, and so now where we are with this is actually less looking at it from a disease perspective, but looking at it from a trait perspective. So looking at things like heights, leaf angles, and how can if you ask yourself the question, what's my favorite variety? and what's it lacking? So is it lacking certain things like brown rust or stripe rust resistance or leaf rust resistance? And then how can I add that into the mix to improve that? So in the UK, for example, we have a big issue with some of our milling wheats around stripe rust and leaf rust resistance. They lack that. And so people are adding in varieties with good, strong stripe rust and leaf rust resistance to kind of dilute the pressure in that variety and slow down the disease moving through the main variety.
Now that's interesting, because I can see how the mixes would easily be marketable as feed, but how does it go with milling wheat? Are the milling companies happy with those mixes?
So when we started this process around 4 years ago, there was a lot of pushback on it, but the mills will still say to this day, no, we don't want blends. No, we don't want blends. But off the record, we definitely have a lot of situations now where people are growing certain milling wheat varieties, bearing in mind we only have 3 main milling wheat varieties. And people are kind of growing 80% of the main variety, the milling wheat, and mixing in 20% of something of a resistant variety. And that actually works really well, especially for something like leaf rust, where when it comes in really fast, and it progresses really fast. So you could get, in a bad year, if you leave it untreated, you could get about 12 cycles. But adding in that little bit of an extra variety there to slow down disease pressure buys you some time and reduces the number of cycles. So it has worked quite well this year for us.
Another thing that we've had a few questions about from people who've been listening to your talks is grazing wheat. And that's something that we've done in the past, and FAR has done a little bit of research on over the years, but not for a wee while. So ears are pricking up when they hear grazing wheat.
Yeah. So why we're looking at it in the UK is it's I think there's been a real focus on kind of technology and kind of using, all these kind of fancy tools. But actually what we need to get back to is just really back to basics. And there are a couple of naysayers kind of like, oh, why are we doing this? We did this in the 80s, whatever. But actually there was nothing wrong with the basics. And so you'll talk to some older farmers who are like, well, we used to do this all the time. Where did it go? And so I think it's a really good thing that it's coming back into practice. I don't think it's going backwards. It's a really useful tool for us, especially now with these warmer, wetter winters where we have a lot of overwintering inoculum. We can't get on to do T0s. So how are we going to manage that early inoculum when you can't spray it with an azole or something else to get rid of the stripe rust or the leaf rust? And this is where grazing comes in. So we also use it in canola to get rid of flea beetle larvae. But from a wheat and cereal perspective, it's really useful as an early PGR, we'll say, kind of and also an early kind of disease management tool instead of applying a T0. So when I spoke to Joe, we talked about the T0 now really being a kind of a plant health timing going forwards. And it's fascinating because we have sheep in England now where we never had sheep before. And it's, you see them around the place and you think, oh, this is quite cool. So yeah, it's coming back, not in a major way, but it's definitely being integrated a lot more.
Yeah, so this is when we're talking about integrated disease management. It's grabbing every possible option and mixing and matching.
Yeah, definitely. And yeah, so it's at that kind of early timing, growth stage 30, 31, before the crop kind of starts tillering and getting up and away. And yeah, it seems to be really, really working quite well for us. So what else have you seen in New Zealand that's been interesting? Oh, it's just like the rotations. And I still can't believe that you have to manage these. So like a 50-year maize rotation that I saw. And my first thought was, how does he manage his fusarium? Because that is unbelievable to me. And I think as well, the importance you put around biosecurity. So I was really impressed with the pea and bean weevil story. And I think there's a lot we can learn there about eradication programs and putting kind of areas in zonal kind of restrictions for things. Especially with the issues we have around cabbage stem flea beetle or oilseed rape or canola. It's really wiping out the UK canola crop at the moment. And I think there's definitely some things we can do to think about there around eradication of certain pests and diseases. Because
you are not allowed to use neonics anymore?
No. So they can only be used in very specific situations, and there has to be a very good justification for that every year.
So we also had some fun while you were here, and you spent last evening at the Arable Awards with us. How did that go?
I absolutely loved it. It wasn't my first award ceremony, but it was definitely the most fun I've had at an award ceremony. I met some amazing people, and it was quite interesting to recognise the same faces that I'd met over the last 2 weeks. New Zealand definitely feels like home to me now, so I hope I can come back in the future. And I was very lucky to sit next to Sid Worsfold and his son Earl. And I had no idea he was going to win an award, but within about 5 minutes of meeting him, I could tell this guy is amazing. And he just knew about every single crop you could imagine, from growing, flax to seed crops of everything. And just the kind of the humble nature, considering how much knowledge they have and the challenges that they face. There's no ego. They just want to get out and do their jobs. And I really value that in people who have a really intense knowledge of something and are really passionate about things. I loved it. And I hope I can come back someday, because there's so much to learn here. Loved it.
Well, thank you, Aoife. We hope you can come back too. And we will look forward to that. So everyone out there, I hope you've enjoyed listening to Aoife. And if you were really lucky, you got to see her in person at one of our events. Coming into springtime, so all of this disease management stuff is really, really hitting the fore. So have a great day on the farm and enjoy your week.
Thanks for tuning in to Cut the Crop, presented to you by FAR. If you'd like to know more about any of the topics discussed or have any suggestions for future topics, go to www.cutthecrop.co.nz.